7 days after my son's wedding, his brand new wife stood on my porch with a corporate lawyer beside her and handed me an eviction notice for a house I had lived in for 40 years. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was doing. She simply nodded at the man in the navy suit, and he dropped a thick envelope on my patio table like he was dropping garbage into a bin. What I found inside that envelope? They were wrong, dead wrong, and they were about to find out exactly how wrong in the worst way possible. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, stay with me. This story isn't finished until the very end, and I promise you, the ending is not what you expect. I live in a modest ranch-style house in a quiet suburb outside Dallas, Texas. It isn't a mansion. It isn't the kind of house that makes people stop their cars to stare. It's just a house, but it's mine, and it's full of memories. The wooden floor in the hallway creaks in the same two spots it always has. The back door still sticks a little in the summer heat. Every room holds some small piece of the life I built with my wife, Evelyn. Evelyn was the smartest person I ever knew. While I spent my days drawing blueprints and calculating load tolerances, she was quietly building something far bigger than either of us realized at the time. Evelyn passed away 6 years ago. I found out just how much those quiet inventions had been worth. $80 million. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office the day I learned the number, staring at a piece of paper like it was written in a foreign language. I kept waiting for someone to tell me it was a mistake, a decimal point in the wrong place. But it wasn't a mistake. It was real. It was mine. And I made a decision that day that I never told anyone about. Not my neighbors, not my closest friends, and most importantly, not my son, Lucas. I kept driving my old pickup truck. I kept living off my modest pension. I kept mowing my own lawn and fixing my own leaky faucets. As far as the entire world knew, including my own son, I was exactly what I appeared to be, a retired engineer of average means, living out his golden years quietly. I want you to remember that detail, because it matters more than you think. Everyone in this story, my son, his new wife, the lawyer they hired. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I had stood in a rented tuxedo and watched my only son marry a woman named Monica. The Texas heat was already pressing down on the neighborhood by 9 in the morning, thick and heavy the way it always is in early summer. I heard tires crunching hard on my gravel driveway. I looked up through the front window and saw a black Mercedes SUV, polished and spotless, pull in behind my old dusty pickup truck. Out stepped Monica, my son's wife of exactly 1 week. She was wearing a crisp white designer suit, and her eyes were completely hidden behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. Her back was straight, her jaw was tight. She didn't look like a woman stopping by with leftover wedding cake. She looked like she was walking into a business meeting she intended to win. From the driver's seat stepped a man I had never seen before in my life. He looked to be in his late 30s, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Everything about him, his posture, his expression, the way he scanned the property like he was already pricing it, screamed corporate lawyer. "Monica," I called out, shielding my eyes against the sun. "This is a surprise. Where's Lucas?" She didn't smile back. She didn't take off her sunglasses. She walked halfway up the stone path and then stopped, keeping a strange, deliberate distance between us, as if I might be contagious. Harrison didn't know yet was that this visit had been planned for weeks, and the man on his porch was about to hand him a document that would try to erase 40 years of his life in one motion. The man stepped onto my porch without extending his hand. He simply opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and dropped it onto the small patio table beside my rocking chair. "Mr. Caldwell," he said. His voice was cold and rehearsed, like he had said these exact words to a dozen other people before me. Frowned, genuinely confused. I looked from the envelope to Bradley, then to Monica. "Owners? What are you talking about? I've owned this house for 40 years. The mortgage was paid off 2 decades ago." Bradley adjusted his tie, looking at me with something between pity and irritation. The exact expression you might give a confused stranger who's holding up the line at a grocery store. "Not anymore, sir. This property has been legally transferred and sold. The asset is currently being liquidated. You have exactly 72 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises." The words hit me one at a time, like small explosions going off inside my skull. I looked at Monica. Monica finally looked at me. She let out a heavy sigh, the kind of sigh you give a child who won't stop asking the same question. "Lucas is busy at the office, Harrison. He couldn't be here for this. The house is sold. It's done. Bradley is just doing his job. You should be packing instead of standing there asking questions." My hands started to tremble, not from fear, but from something sharper. An adrenaline rush I hadn't felt since the early years of my career, back when a miscalculation could mean a structure failing in front of hundreds of people. I reached down and picked up the manila envelope. Inside was a stack of legal documents, deeds of trust, transfer of ownership forms, sale agreements. I scanned the dense legal language, searching for some kind of explanation, some clue that this was all an enormous misunderstanding. Then I flipped to the final page, and my breath caught in my throat. At the bottom was a red county notary seal. Beside it, a power of attorney declaration granting full legal authority to liquidate all real estate assets in my name. Harrison Caldwell. It was a perfect match. The upward slant of the capital H, the sharp cross of the T. It was exactly the way I signed my checks, my tax returns, my contracts. It's flawless. Except for one enormous, horrifying detail. I'd never signed that paper in my life. I stared at the black ink until the letters blurred together. The realization hit me like a freight train slamming into a stalled car. My own son. Bradley tapped his expensive watch. I strongly suggest you start calling moving companies, Mr. Caldwell. The buyers are eager to begin renovations. I'll leave my card. Do not attempt to contact my clients about this matter again. Any further communication goes through my office. He set a glossy white business card beside the envelope. Monica turned on her heel, her heels clicking sharply against the stone path, and walked back to the Mercedes without a backward glance. I stood alone on my porch. The Texas sun beat down on my shoulders, but my whole body felt ice cold. My own son and his wife of exactly 1 week had just ambushed me. I looked down at the forged signature one more time. And then, something strange happened. The shock started to fade, replaced by a cold, eerie calm, the same calm I used to feel when I was called in to investigate a catastrophic structural failure. Thought I was weak. They thought I was naive, had absolutely no idea about the $90 million storm they had just woken up. Folded the documents, slid them back into the envelope, and walked back into the house. I had a phone call to make. I closed the heavy front door behind me, and the sound of the latch clicking shut sealed out the Texas heat and the last traces of dust kicked up by Monica's departing car. 72 hours. That was all the time they had given me, 3 days to erase 40 years of my life. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. That has never been how my mind works. Decades of engineering had trained me to treat the point of failure, apparently, was that I had trusted my own son without question. Stated a little over a month earlier. I ran my finger slowly across the forged signature. But I knew my own hand. And more importantly, I understood the physical mechanics of how ink moves across paper when someone is actually signing their name versus carefully copying it. The pressure was wrong. The lines lacked the natural, unbroken flow of a signature written in one smooth motion. It had been drawn, not written. Knowing it was forged was only the first step. The harder question was, who had done this and how? Monica was certainly cold enough and ambitious enough to have dreamed up a plan like this. But Monica had never been inside my house alone. Lucas, my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle in this very driveway. The betrayal crystallized in my chest, hardening into something sharp and cold. 72 hours is not a normal legal timeline. It's a psychological weapon. It's designed to overwhelm a person so completely that they don't have time to think clearly, don't have time to call a lawyer, don't have time to question anything. They knew that if I had time to think, if I had time to challenge this through proper legal channels, their fraudulent paperwork would collapse under the first serious legal review. Believed I would simply bow my head, pack my memories into cardboard boxes, and quietly disappear into some cheap apartment somewhere. Leaned back on the bar stool and let out a long, slow breath. The clock in the living room chimed the quarter hour, a deep, resonant sound. Wasn't going anywhere. The trusting father who had stood proudly in a tuxedo at his son's wedding exactly 1 week earlier, that man was gone. He had quietly died on this porch the moment Monica refused to take off her sunglasses. In his place was a man who happened to be sitting on $90 million, and who had all the patience in the world to take apart their entire scheme, piece by piece, exactly the way he used to take apart a broken machine. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the envelope, and walked over to the kitchen wall, where an old landline phone still hung from years past. I picked up the receiver and dialed my son's number. Harrison was about to hear his own son lie to his face, and the story Lucas told him was far more disturbing than a simple house sale. Dad, Lucas said when he picked up. His voice was strangely calm. There was no shock in it, no confusion. He sounded like a man who had been expecting this exact call, like an actor waiting for his cue. Lucas, I said, letting my voice shake just enough to sound overwhelmed. Waited, hoping to hear some crack in his voice, some flicker of guilt. Instead, I heard a long, theatrical sigh. Dad, please calm down, Lucas said softly. I know this is a shock. I wanted to be there to tell you myself, but I was scared of how you'd react. I couldn't bear to see you upset, but we had to do this. We didn't have a choice. No choice, I repeated, leaning against the counter to sell the illusion of a broken man, even though he couldn't see me. Dad, stop, he said, cutting me off gently. Don't say things like that. Nobody forged anything. You signed those papers last month. You just don't remember doing it. The audacity of it took my breath away. Don't remember, I said, letting my voice crack. What are you talking about? It's not your fault, Dad. Dementia, I repeated, genuinely stunned by the sheer scale of his lie. I've never been diagnosed with anything. I haven't even seen a doctor in over a year except for a routine checkup. Closed my eyes. The memory of that day came rushing back with sudden, painful clarity. Lucas had come over to cook a pot of soup. He had specifically asked me to go out to the garage and find an old socket wrench for him. While I was outside, digging through dusty tool trays in the summer heat, he must have turned the burner up as high as it would go, letting the broth boil over onto the open flame. Remembered wiping the greasy soot off the stovetop after they rushed out the door that day, apologizing to them for my own supposed carelessness. "Didn't leave that stove on, Lucas," I whispered, letting a note of desperate pleading creep into my voice. "See, this is exactly what the doctor warned us about," Lucas said, his voice thick with fake heartbreak. "A premier assisted living facility." The word sounded expensive, responsible, and completely fake. I knew exactly what my house was worth. I knew roughly what those facilities cost. The math didn't add up. If they had truly arranged a placement for me, they would have brought me along for the process. They wouldn't have sent a stranger with a briefcase and a 72-hour ultimatum. "Lucas, please," I said, forcing a sob into my voice. "You can't force me out of my home. I built this house with your mother. Her garden is here. Her memory is here. You can't just pack me away like old furniture." I waited, wondering if the mention of Evelyn would crack something open in him. Moment, the line was silent. "Dad, Mom is gone," Lucas finally said. His voice had lost all warmth, using his dead mother to justify his crime. I took a slow breath and swallowed everything screaming inside me to tell him I knew exactly what he had done. "Hey, Lucas," I whispered, sounding utterly defeated. "No, Dad," he said smoothly. "Just rest. We'll handle everything." Hung up. I stood there, holding the dead receiver against my ear for a long moment before slowly setting it back on the hook. The click echoed through the empty hallway. Had stolen my past, and they believed they had already written my future. They're terribly, terribly mistaken. I walked to the kitchen sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the window above the faucet, my hair gray, my hands lined with decades of work, but my eyes steady. I was old. I was far from finished. The real fight had only just begun. I stood at the sink for a long moment, letting the cold water drip slowly off my chin, grounding myself in the present. I knew better than to let a lie like that take root. As a mechanical engineer, I had spent my entire career diagnosing catastrophic failures. When a bridge collapses or a turbine explodes, you don't scream at the wreckage. You trace the fracture lines back to the exact moment they first appeared. My son wasn't simply lying to cover up a spontaneous theft. He was executing a plan. He had spent weeks quietly laying the groundwork for a story about my mental decline, so that when the final blow came, nobody would question it. I sat back down at the counter and forced myself to walk through the stove incident again, slowly, piece by piece, looking for every detail I might have missed the first time. It had happened 10 days earlier. Lucas had stopped by unannounced on a random Thursday afternoon, carrying 2 bags of groceries, insisting he wanted to cook his old man a pot of vegetable soup. He filled a large pot with water, set it on the front burner, and lit the flame. I knew exactly where those wrenches were, buried at the bottom of a heavy steel toolbox in the darkest, most cluttered corner of the garage. It would take me 10 or 15 minutes to find them. I smiled, happy to be useful, and walked out without a trace of suspicion. When I stepped outside, the trap was set in motion. While I was digging through the garage in the summer heat, Lucas hadn't been waiting patiently in the kitchen. He had turned the burner up as high as it would go, letting the soup boil over and drown the flame, filling the kitchen with gas. I remembered coughing, my eyes watering, the smoke alarm screaming. I remembered rushing to shut off the gas line, my hands shaking. Less than 5 minutes later, Lucas and Monica came bursting through the front door, out of breath, looking terrified. They claimed they had driven halfway down the street, realized they forgot to say goodbye, and turned around just in time to see smoke pouring from the kitchen window. Lucas had looked me dead in the eye and asked, with perfect sincerity, why I had turned the stove up so high and wandered off. I had been so disoriented by the smoke and the noise that I actually doubted my own memory. I apologized to them. I genuinely believed I had made a dangerous mistake. Now, sitting alone in my silent kitchen, the truth hit me with devastating force. It wasn't a memory lapse. It was a staged crime scene. Lucas had created a fire hazard specifically to manufacture evidence of my supposed decline, to risk my life to steal my house. The realization was so dark, so calculated, that it stripped away the last traces of paternal affection I had left. Meeting him with honest outrage was a guaranteed path to losing everything. I couldn't win this with brute force. I remained at the counter for a long time, staring at nothing, quietly accepting my new reality. My son believed he was the architect of my destruction. He had no idea he had just handed me the blueprints to his own. I left the kitchen and walked down the hallway to my study. I opened the top drawer of my old oak desk and pulled out my silver-framed reading glasses, along with a small brass jeweler's loupe I had used for decades to inspect hairline fractures in aircraft-grade metal. I had already confirmed. I moved my eyes away from the fake signature and down to the bottom left corner of the page, where a circular notary stamp had been pressed into the paper. The notary's name meant nothing to me. Likely some corrupt associate the lawyer kept on his payroll for exactly this kind of task. But it wasn't the name that made my breath catch. It was the date. The document stated that I, Harrison Caldwell, had personally appeared before this notary in Dallas, Texas on August 14th. I stared at that date through the magnifying loupe until the numbers burned themselves into my memory. A low, cold smile crept across my face. My son was intelligent. He held an advanced business degree. In his rush to steal my house, he had made a careless mistake. He had picked the wrong date on the calendar. I got up and walked back to my study, this time heading straight for a tall wooden bookshelf in the corner. I pulled down a thick, weathered leather journal, my personal fishing log. Ever since Evelyn passed away, I had made it a point to take one major fishing trip every year, far away from everything. And I documented every detail of it the way an engineer documents everything, precisely, with dates, coordinates, and notes. I carried the journal back to the kitchen and set it beside the forged document. I flipped through the thick pages, past spring, past early summer, until my fingers landed on the middle of August. It was written in my own unmistakable handwriting. Memories came flooding back. The biting wind, the churning gray waves, the smell of diesel and bait, the exhausting 40-minute fight with a 60-pound halibut. Most importantly, I remembered the isolation. We were out on open water, completely beyond the reach of any cell tower. I looked from the fishing log to the forged document. My son had accidentally handed me an airtight alibi. I had receipts for the plane tickets. I had the passenger manifest from the charter company. I had credit card charges for rented fishing gear. I had 15 other men on that boat, including the captain, who could testify under oath that I was stranded in the middle of the Alaskan Ocean on the exact day. The legal foundation of their entire scheme wasn't just questionable. It was provably, criminally fraudulent. I closed the journal slowly, my mind racing through the implications. If you find one serious structural flaw in a building, you have to assume the entire foundation might be compromised. The house was just a physical asset, but my life was connected to dozens of other vulnerable points. If Lucas had managed to bypass the legal safeguards on a property deed, he might have found a way around the security on my finances too. He knew my social security number. He knew my mother's maiden name. He had the answers to every security question I had ever set up. Push the documents aside. The time for looking backward was over. I needed to check my bank accounts immediately. What Harrison found in his checking account that night would confirm his worst fear. His son hadn't just stolen a house. He had stolen everything he could get his hands on. I left my study and walked down the hall to the small spare room I used as a home office. A modest space filled with old drafting tables, rolled-up blueprints, and a sturdy, unremarkable computer in the corner. I sat down in my worn leather chair and pressed the power button. While I waited for it to load, I thought about the financial boundaries I had carefully built over the past 6 years. When Evelyn passed and left me the trust, I made a deliberate choice to keep my daily life completely separate from that fortune. To keep this illusion intact, I had kept my original local checking account active, a standard account holding roughly $40,000. The screen finally lit up, casting a pale blue glow across the dark room. I opened my browser and navigated to my bank's login page. The dashboard finally loaded. I looked at the bold black numbers under available balance. $0 I leaned closer to the screen, thinking for a moment it must be some kind of technical glitch. I refreshed the page. The same number appeared again. 0. The account had been completely drained. Every dollar I had earned over 40 years of honest labor had vanished. I didn't feel panic over the money itself. $40,000 meant nothing to a man sitting on $90 million. I could lose that amount every single day for the rest of my life and never feel it. I clicked into the transaction history, needing to understand exactly how and when this had happened. An outgoing wire transfer, initiated and processed the previous afternoon. The amount $39,985, leaving a small $15 fee the bank had absorbed. Money had been wired to a commercial holding account in Chicago, Illinois. The memo line, typed with sickening precision, were 2 words. Facility deposit. My hands curled into fists. Lucas and Monica had used my own stolen pension money to help build the fake story they were feeding to me. They had robbed me completely, and they had dressed the robbery up as an act of devotion. Lucas was a senior vice president at a respected logistics firm, earning a healthy 6-figure salary with quarterly bonuses. Monica constantly boasted about her wealthy family background and her supposed investment portfolio. So why would 2 supposedly wealthy professionals risk serious federal fraud charges to steal $40,000 from an old man? If they were simply greedy, the house alone would have been enough. It was desperation. People with real money don't risk 15 years in prison to steal $40,000. They only take that kind of risk when their backs are completely against a wall, when they are frantic for immediate cash. A rushed sale, I pushed away from the computer and walked out of the small office, my steps steady and deliberate. I passed through the kitchen and headed down the hallway to the master bedroom. I walked over to a heavy oak armoire that had belonged to my grandfather. I gripped the bottom edge and slid it sideways across the hardwood floor on hidden custom casters, revealing a plain section of floorboard beneath. I knelt down and pressed my thumb against a barely visible knot in the wood. A small panel popped open, revealing the biometric scanner of a hidden floor safe I had installed years earlier, back when I first learned about Evelyn's trust. I pressed my finger against the glass. The lock disengaged with a deep metallic thud. I lifted the door. Inside sat a few sacks of cash, some of Evelyn's old jewelry, and a small black case. I reached past the cash and pulled out the case, unsnapping the latches to reveal a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. I bought it years ago specifically for managing the trust, to make sure none of my financial dealings ever crossed into the same networks as my ordinary everyday life. I carried it out to the living room and sat down in my recliner. I powered it on, and the small screen lit the dark room with a harsh white glow. Caldwell. Sylvia was the senior wealth manager for the trust. Quite late in Texas, she continued. Isn't Sylvia, I said. Heard the subtle shift in her breathing. The pleasantries disappeared instantly. The targets, she said. Lucas Caldwell and Monica Caldwell, I said, feeling a strange cold satisfaction at officially naming my own son as a target. I want your forensic team on this tonight. Every credit card statement, every wire transfer, every mortgage document, every tax return from the last 5 years. I need to know exactly who they owe money to, how much, and what's on the line. They're desperate for cash, Sylvia. They just committed federal wire fraud to steal $40,000 from my pension account, and they used a forged power of attorney to sell my house out from under me. There was a moment of stunned silence. Your son forged a property deed to steal your home? Sylvia asked, her professional calm cracking slightly. Harrison, that's a serious federal offense. I can have my legal team file an injunction by dawn. I can have local authorities at his door before he finishes his morning coffee. No, I said sharply. Don't touch the sale. Don't alert anyone. If we freeze this right now, they'll panic and scatter, and I'll never find out what's actually driving this. I want them to believe they've won. I want them to feel completely safe. This entire audit needs to be quiet. They can't know anyone is looking. Understood, she said, adjusting instantly to the new plan. My team will use ghost protocols. We'll trace their financial footprint without leaving any trace of our own. What's our timeline? 4 hours, I said, glancing toward the grandfather clock across the room. They gave me a 72-hour eviction. Have the preliminary package on your secure server by tomorrow evening, Sylvia confirmed. Is there anything else you need? Security? No, I said calmly. I'm safe. Just get me the data. Ended the call and set the phone down on the glass coffee table. I leaned back into the leather recliner and let out a slow breath, feeling the adrenaline moving steadily through my veins. Trap was set. While Sylvia's team worked in the digital shadows, I still had a performance to maintain in the real world. I glanced toward the large bay window in my living room. I walked out to the garage and found a stack of flattened cardboard boxes near the lawnmower, along with a roll of packing tape. I carried them inside and began assembling them in the middle of my living room floor. I was setting the stage for a war they didn't know was coming. Once the visible props were in place, I moved on to something far more important. Called Monica. Cleared my throat first, forcing a rough, wet tremor into my voice before she answered on the fourth ring, her tone sharp and impatient. Monica, I said, letting my voice break just slightly. Is it Harrison? She asked, her voice thick with condescension. We're very busy handling your transition. I know, I whispered, sounding thoroughly defeated. I'm packing just like Lucas asked. I could almost hear the calculation happening in her head. She wanted me gone from her life, but denying a weeping old man, his dead wife's photo albums, was a bad look, even for her, and letting me come by fed perfectly into her narrative that she was the generous caretaker indulging my last pathetic requests. Fine, she snapped. But make it quick. Lucas isn't home and I have calls to make. Thanked her, laying the gratitude on thick, and ended the call. I loaded the wooden box into my truck and drove across town to their neighborhood. Harrison was about to hide inside their penthouse would give him a front row seat to the most damning conversation of his entire life. Lucas and Monica lived in a sprawling modern penthouse in one of the most expensive high-rise buildings in the city. I took the private elevator to the top floor, my hands steady, my heart calm. I stepped off into the private foyer and knocked timidly on their double doors. Monica opened the door wearing a silk robe, a tablet clutched in her manicured hand. She looked me up and down with unfiltered disgust. She didn't see a retired engineer standing in front of her. She saw a burden. In, she said, stepping aside without offering to help carry the box. Just put it somewhere out of the way. Don't scuff the hardwood. I shuffled forward, deliberately rounding my shoulders, shortening my stride to mimic a frail, uncertain old man. I clutched the wooden chest awkwardly against my chest, letting my hands tremble just enough to sell the performance. As I crossed the sunlit living room, I purposely dragged my left boot against the edge of an expensive rug and stumbled, letting out a sharp gasp as the box slipped from my grip and crashed to the floor. Oh, for heaven's sake, Monica hissed, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. Harrison, watch what you're doing. So sorry, Monica, I stammered, dropping to my knees with practiced clumsiness. My hands just aren't working right today. I began slowly, shakily gathering the albums. Monica stood over me, making no effort to help. Her expression was pure contempt. She opened her mouth to scold me again. Clean this up and leave the box in the corner, she snapped, turning her back on me. I have to take this call. Walked briskly toward the far end of the open kitchen, already raising her voice into the phone. It was my window. The moment her back was fully turned, the trembling old man vanished instantly. I moved quickly and quietly, the way I used to move through cramped machinery, checking for hidden flaws. I pulled the first audio recorder from my jacket pocket and slid across the floor toward their massive sectional sofa. I reached beneath the fabric, feeling for a solid wooden crossbeam, and pressed the adhesive backing firmly against it, securing the device near the center of the room. I quietly gathered the remaining albums, placed them back in the chest, and pushed the box against the wall. Monica was still pacing in the kitchen, arguing about a delayed wire transfer. I stood up smoothly and walked quietly down the wide hallway toward the master suite. I knew the layout well enough. Lucas kept a private home office just off the main bedroom. If they were discussing their debts or anything else they wanted kept secret, they would do it behind those closed doors. I slipped into the office. It was immaculate, dominated by a glass desk and 3 monitors. I didn't waste time looking through drawers. I needed a listening post that would never be casually discovered. I slipped back down the hallway just as Monica ended her call, timing my return to the living room perfectly. Trojan horse was inside. The drive home was a blur of passing streetlights. I pulled into my driveway, walked through the front door, and sat down in my study waiting. Covert war had officially begun. I sat down at my desk and opened the black case containing the receiver for the 2 audio recorders. I plugged in a pair of noise-canceling headphones and slipped them over my ears, adjusting them until the sounds of my own house faded into nothing. First, there was only static. I closed my eyes and waited, patient as a man watching a slow leak in a dam. A few minutes later, the static was pierced by the sharp sound of a door slamming. I leaned forward, pressing the headphones tighter. The audio was remarkably clear, picking up the frantic sound of leather shoes pacing across hardwood. I could picture my son exactly, pacing back and forth in that glass-walled office like a trapped animal. The rapid, uneven rhythm of his footsteps broadcast a level of panic he had completely hidden from me during our phone call. Then came the distinct sound of ice clinking against crystal, followed by the splash of liquid. He was pouring a drink, likely a stiff pour of whiskey, at an hour when most people were still starting their coffee. Pacing grew faster, more erratic, until the office door swung open again. "Have you lost your mind?" A voice snapped. It was Monica. Her tone was completely stripped of the sugary concern she used in public. It was sharp, venomous. "I'm ruining everything?" Lucas shot back, his voice cracking with a pitch I had never heard from him. "Do you hear yourself, Monica? I just committed a federal felony." Closed my eyes, letting his uncoerced confession settle over me. "Keep your voice down," Monica hissed. "Do you want the whole building to hear you?" "It's done, Lucas. The paperwork went through. The eviction was served. Your father bought the whole story. He's packing boxes right now, completely convinced his mind is failing him. We have the upper hand. Stop acting like a scared child and start acting like a man who wants to survive the week." "Survive?" Lucas fired back, the ice in his glass rattling as his hands shook. "We're drowning, Monica." I sat perfectly still, my coffee going cold beside me. Everything Sylvia's team had found matched exactly what I was hearing. The fear driving him wasn't remorse. It was the fear of getting caught. For a moment, the microphone picked up only heavy, ragged breathing. I waited for Monica to offer comfort. "Listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous whisper. Pacing stopped. The silence became suffocating. "We're holding $2.5 million in debt," she continued, "and we don't owe it to a forgiving bank. We owe it to a private lending group out of Chicago. They don't care about your guilt. They care about their money." I heard the click of her heels as she stepped closer to him. "Gave us 10 days, Lucas. 10 days to produce $1 million in cash, or they've made it very clear what happens next. They will not send a collection letter. They will break our legs. They will take everything we own." Mine went silent, save for the sound of Lucas's terrified breathing. I slowly removed the headphones and set them on the desk. My son had sold his soul to keep up the appearance of wealth, and now the debt had come to collect. He needed my house to survive. Slow, dark smile crossed my face. Next thing Harrison heard through those hidden microphones would turn a story about greed into something far darker, a plan involving his own death. I sat perfectly still in the dim study, letting the reality of what I'd just heard settle in, but the recording wasn't finished. I pulled the headphones back on. Lucas spoke again, his voice quieter now, stripped of energy. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, we have the house equity coming in. We have the 40,000. We can pay the initial $1 million by Friday." Pressed the headphones tighter, waiting to hear her answer. The laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was cold, sharp, genuinely amused, the laugh of a predator admiring its own trap. "Premier assisted living facility," she repeated, dripping with mockery. "Are you still clinging to that script, Lucas? That story was for your father. That was for the lawyer, so he'd feel comfortable drafting the paperwork. You honestly think I'd waste a single dollar on a luxury suite for that old man?" "And where is he going?" Lucas demanded, panic rising in his voice. "Monica, the movers are bringing a transport vehicle Monday. Where did you tell them to take him?" "I found a place," Monica said, her casual tone landing like a physical blow. "It's not a premier facility, Lucas. It's not even a licensed clinic. It's an off-the-grid hospice compound about 10 miles north of the border. I wired a $2,000 deposit through an offshore account. That leaves us $38,000 for the syndicate. Your father isn't going to a resort. He's going to a warehouse. Warehouse? Lucas stammered. What are you talking about? He needs meals. He needs supervision. If anyone checks on him. Nobody is going to check on him, Monica said, her voice flattening into something almost mechanical. It's a black hole, Lucas. No registered doctors, no state oversight, no visitor logs. The people who run it cater to families who need their elderly relatives to quietly disappear. They lock the doors and they keep them sedated. Stop breathing. At his age, Monica continued, entirely unfazed by the horror of her own words. With the stress of the eviction and the sedation, his heart will give out within a month, probably sooner. I sat frozen, my whole body ice cold. They were not simply stealing my house. They were sending me to die. Month, Lucas repeated slowly, the horror in his voice sliding into something worse. Paid in untraceable cash, Monica assured him. They transport cargo. They don't ask questions. Pulled off the headphones with shaking hands. The clock in the hallway suddenly felt deafening. It was no longer a story about a greedy son stealing a house. This was a fight for my life against two people who saw my death as a convenient business transaction. Lucas was speaking again, quieter now, his voice trembling. Monica, he whispered. We don't have to go this far. We can take the house equity and pay the syndicate. We can find a real facility for him, a state place, somewhere cheap but safe. For a moment, I felt something close to hope. Maybe there was still a small piece of my son left in there. Silence that followed was heavy. Just let out a stifled sob. But sending him down there knowing what they do to people. It won't just be waiting for a phone call, Monica said, her voice gliding over the line with chilling calm. I gripped the edge of my desk. 6 months ago, Monica continued, when I realized my real estate margins were collapsing, I knew we needed a contingency plan. I gasped. A life insurance policy for how much? $5 million, Monica said, the number rang out with absolute clarity. It's ironclad, she continued, with one specific condition tied to his age and his supposed pre-existing conditions. I sat frozen, absorbing the full, monstrous scale of what I was hearing. They weren't just stealing my house. They had priced the remainder of my life at exactly $5 million, and they were executing the plan with the casual efficiency of a routine business deal. $5 million, Lucas repeated slowly, the horror in his voice curdling into something far worse. Relief. That clears everything. The syndicate, the mortgage, the credit cards, everything. Yes, Monica said softly. It clears the board, but only if you hold your nerve. Only if you put him in that van Monday morning and never look back. The long, agonizing silence. Okay, Lucas finally whispered. We send him to the border. I reached up and pulled off the headphones. Whatever paternal love I had left for my son was gone in that instant. I was no longer a victim in this story. Gloves were off. I sat in the silence of my study for a long time after I heard those words. My son and his wife weren't simply thieves. A normal father would have called the police right then. He would have handed over the recordings and let the justice system take its course. But I was no longer thinking like a normal father. The legal system would arrest them eventually, but it would take years of litigation, lawyers, and appeals. I refused to give them that luxury. I picked up the satellite phone again and dialed Sylvia. Listen, she answered immediately, her voice sharp despite the early hour. I have my team going through the rest of the real estate data. The crater keeps getting bigger. The deeper we dig into Monica's accounts, the worse it looks. Forget the leverage numbers for a moment, Sylvia, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. The situation has changed. There was a long silence on the line. When Sylvia spoke again, her professional calm had cracked, replaced by cold anger. Listen, we need to call the IFE immediately. I have a direct contact in the regional office. We can have them in custody before sunrise. No, I said firmly. I want to handle this my own way. I need you to pivot the entire team. Stop looking at Monica's real estate losses and focus on the Chicago syndicate. Sylvia hesitated. Harrison, those are extremely dangerous people. They operate completely outside any legal banking framework. I know exactly who they are, I said. And because they operate outside the law, all they care about is liquid cash. They don't want to wait around collecting weekly interest from a desperate executive if they can get their full principal back right now. I want you to authorize a transfer from the trust. I want you to buy Lucas and Monica's debt. Want to pay off their loan? Sylvia asked, genuine confusion in her voice. I'm not saving them, Sylvia, I said. I'm purchasing them. Buy the debt. Legally acquire the promissory notes. Transfer the entire $2.5 million obligation away from the syndicate and assign it to a private holding company that I control completely. I want the syndicate to get their money, and I want every ounce of leverage they hold over my son to transfer directly to me. There was a long pause, and then a slow, understanding breath. Want to become their executioner, she murmured. I want to own the axe currently swinging over their necks, I corrected her. How fast can this move? I said, and ended the call. I sat in the dark, watching the minutes crawl by on my computer screen, picturing the men in Chicago waking up to find their $2.5 million problem solved by an anonymous buyer. The sun began to rise outside my window. 2 hours later, the satellite phone vibrated. It's done, Sylvia said. The wire transfer went through without a single question. Thanked her and set the phone down. I was no longer the confused old man packing boxes into cardboard cartons. I was the architect of their downfall. I possessed the legal and financial authority to crush them completely. Believed they were about to walk into my house Monday morning and collect a final, easy victory. I was going to let them walk right through my front door, and then I was going to drop the axe on their heads. Monday morning arrived, and Harrison Caldwell was waiting for them, but not the man they expected to see. Monday morning arrived with a clear sunrise that painted the sky in soft gold and orange. I stood by my bay window, watching the light spread across the lawns. The quiet was broken by the low grinding of a large commercial moving truck pulling up in front of my driveway. Its brakes hissed as the driver killed the engine. Behind the truck, a silver sedan pulled up to the curb. A moment later, a third car arrived. Bradley Thorne, the corrupt attorney who had drafted the fraudulent paperwork. He climbed out, grabbed his leather briefcase, and adjusted his tie with the same smug confidence he had shown on my porch a week earlier. They gathered on the sidewalk, exchanging a few quiet words. They were completely confident in their victory. They expected to walk into my house and find a broken, sobbing old man surrounded by cardboard boxes, ready to be quietly shipped off toward the border. I walked to my full-length mirror one final time. I was no longer wearing the faded flannel shirt that had become my daily uniform. I wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, a garment from a different chapter of my life, kept preserved in a cedar closet for occasions I never expected to have again. The frail, confused pensioner they thought they had outsmarted no longer existed. I walked into the living room. Sylvia Vargas was already waiting for me, having arrived an hour earlier through the back entrance, accompanied by two broad-shouldered men in dark suits. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat down in my leather recliner, crossing my legs. The cardboard boxes near the window were the final piece of theater. I waited in complete silence. "Dad," Lucas called out, his voice loud and authoritative. "The movers are here. We need to wrap this up. The transport van for your facility arrives in 20 minutes, and we can't afford delays." He rounded the corner into the living room and stopped so abruptly that his shoes skidded against the hardwood. Monica bumped into his back and let out a sharp gasp of annoyance before peering around his shoulder. Confident swagger vanished from both of them instantly. He sat perfectly still in the recliner, taking a slow sip of coffee. Bradley pushed past my paralyzed son, completely oblivious to the shift in the room, and marched toward the center of the living room, waving a thick stack of papers. "Mr. Caldwell," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "As per the eviction notice served to you Friday, you are now legally required to vacate these premises immediately. If you refuse to comply, I'll be forced to contact the sheriff to have you physically removed." I set my coffee down gently on my knee. "Welcome to call the sheriff, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice smooth and steady. "But I believe these two gentlemen behind me might save you the trouble." Bradley finally stopped waving his papers and looked past me. His smirk faltered the instant his eyes landed on the federal badges glinting under the living room lights. The color drained from his face. Lucas remained frozen near the foyer, his eyes moving from my tailored suit to my calm, unshaken expression. "Lucas," I said, shifting my attention entirely to my son. "You look surprised. Did you truly believe I would spend my final days locked in a warehouse near the border? Did you actually think I would let you sedate me until my heart gave out, just so you could collect $5 million? Lucas staggered backward as if he had been struck. He hit the wall behind him, his breath turning into shallow, panicked gasps. He knew instantly, in that moment, that I had the recordings. He knew his entire plan was exposed. Monica's handbag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. "10 seconds to explain yourselves," I said, my voice cold, ending the charade completely. The silence stretched into something suffocating. Monica, who finally broke first, her survival instincts kicking in. "You're bluffing," she shrieked, straightening her spine and pointing a manicured finger at my chest. I didn't raise my voice to match hers. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen once, pairing it seamlessly with the surround sound system I had installed in the living room years earlier. Instantly, Monica's own voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable, amplified through the speakers. "Found a place. It's an unlicensed, off-the-grid hospice compound about 10 miles north of the border. They cater specifically to families who need their elderly relatives to quietly disappear." Monica physically recoiled, both hands flying to her mouth. A choked, guttural sound escaped her throat. Lucas's face turned a sickly gray as his own voice began playing through the recording, his cowardice broadcast to the entire room. The recording continued into the darkest part of their conversation. Lucas's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the foyer table to keep himself from collapsing entirely. Let the recording play for a moment longer before pressing the screen again, plunging the room back into a heavy, ringing silence. "You thought you were clever," I said, standing slowly and buttoning my jacket. "You thought you could treat a human life like a line item on a spreadsheet. You planned to kill your own father to cover a bad financial bet. You assumed I was deaf, blind, and defenseless." I walked toward Lucas, pulling a thick folded stack of documents from my inside pocket. "You tried to murder me to pay off a $2.5 million debt," I said, stopping just a few feet from him. You forged documents, you hired a corrupt lawyer, you planned to send my body to an unmarked grave to satisfy a Chicago lending syndicate. You believed $5 million in fraudulent insurance money would balance your ledger and set you free. Held up the documents. You owe the wrong person now, Lucas. Lucas stared blankly at the papers, his mind completely unable to process the ground shifting beneath him. "Are those?" he whispered, his voice cracking into a dry, broken rasp. "These are the original promissory notes," I said, tossing them onto the glass coffee table where they landed with a final definitive thud. "They're the legal contracts detailing every dollar you borrowed from the Chicago syndicate. Early this morning, while you were dreaming about your $5 million payout, I authorized my financial team to buy out your entire criminal debt." Monica let out a ragged breath, her eyes darting between the documents, the agents, and my unmoving face. "You out?" she stammered. "How could you possibly afford that? You're a retired engineer. You live on a fixed pension. We saw your bank accounts. You saw the profile I curated for public consumption," I said. "You saw the modest accounts I used to buy groceries and pay property taxes. What you never saw, what your own greed prevented you from ever discovering, is the fortune I've quietly managed for 6 years. I'm the sole beneficiary of a $90 million trust fund left to me by my late wife. I have resources you cannot even begin to comprehend." Lucas let out a small, wounded sound, completely overwhelmed by the scale of what he was hearing. He had traded his father's life and his own soul for pennies, never realizing he was standing on top of a mountain of gold the entire time. "I used a small fraction of my wealth to satisfy the syndicate," I continued. "I wired $2.5 million to their holding account. They happily signed over every ounce of leverage they held over your lives. I am now your sole creditor. Your loan is in default. I am legally exercising my right to immediate asset seizure. I'm seizing the penthouse. I'm seizing your vehicles. I'm seizing your accounts. You are completely, hopelessly bankrupt." Let the silence settle for one long moment. "For your documented, premeditated plan to commit murder, you're both going to prison for the rest of your lives." Didn't look at me with any trace of remorse. Instead, she turned on her husband, her eyes blazing with pure self-preservation. "This is your fault," she screamed. "You told me he was just a clueless old man. You promised this would be a clean transition." This didn't even react to her accusations. His entire world had just been turned upside down. He fell to his knees and crawled across the floor toward me, grabbing at the fabric of my pants. "Dad, please," he sobbed, his voice reduced to a pathetic whimper. "You can't do this. I'm your only son." I was terrified. I looked down at the man clutching desperately at my legs. For a brief second, a flicker of memory surfaced. That boy had been gone for a long time, replaced entirely by the man crying on my floor. Felt nothing, no pity, no hesitation. I reached down, gripped his wrists, and firmly pulled his hand off my suit, letting him slump backward onto the rug. "You stopped being my son the moment you priced the rest of my life at $5 million, I said quietly. "You stopped being my flesh and blood the second you arranged a transport van to carry me to a border warehouse to die. You didn't make a mistake, Lucas. You made a financial decision." I gave a small nod to the agents behind me. They moved forward with practiced efficiency. One grabbed Lucas by the collar and hauled him to his feet, sweeping his arms behind his back. I didn't stay to watch them read the Miranda warnings. Buttoned my jacket, turned my back on the ruined remains of my former family, and walked toward the front door. Leah stepped aside to let me pass, a rare smile of quiet respect on her face. She fell into step beside me as we walked out into the bright morning sunlight. I didn't give them a second glance. I kept walking, my head held high, my posture straight, my dignity fully restored. A black town car was idling near the driveway. The driver opened the door as I approached. I slid into the leather interior, breathing in the rich scent of the upholstery. I looked out the window one final time at the modest house where I had lived for over 30 years. It held no sentimental weight for me in that moment. It was simply an empty structure, finally purged of the people who had secretly plotted to drain my life away. The driver pulled away from the curb. The weeks that followed were a slow, methodical unwinding of everything Lucas and Monica had built. Federal prosecutors moved quickly once Sylvia's team handed over the evidence. The forged documents, the audio recordings, the financial records showing every wire transfer, every fabricated medical claim, every dollar diverted from my pension into their collapsing debts. Monica's testimony, once the reality of a life sentence settled in, turned into a bitter, desperate stream of blame aimed entirely at my son. She insisted, over and over, that the idea had been his from the beginning. Lucas said very little in the months that followed. I was told by Sylvia, who monitored the case closely on my behalf, that he had grown quiet in his cell, staring for long stretches at nothing, as if replaying every decision that had led him there. I never visited him. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from losing a child who is still alive. A grief with no clear ending, no funeral, no moment of closure. I turned that question over more times than I can count. And eventually, I arrived at an answer I could live with. I had raised him with honesty, with patience, with every ounce of decency I possessed. Whatever crumbled inside him, whatever allowed him to look at his own father and see nothing but a financial obstacle, was a choice he made on his own. I refused to carry the weight of a decision that was never mine to make. I sold the old house eventually, Not because Lucas and Monica had stolen it, but because I no longer wanted to live inside a building that held that particular memory. I never touched the majority of the $90 million. I didn't need to. I gave a portion of it to a foundation that helps elderly victims of financial fraud navigate the legal system, something Sylvia helped me set up quietly, without my name attached to any headlines. I didn't want recognition. I simply wanted something good to come out of the worst experience of my life. Family is often described as the safest place in the world, the one bond you can always count on, no matter what else falls apart. But blood alone doesn't guarantee loyalty. My son believed my age made me weak. He believed my silence, my modest lifestyle, my quiet patience meant I was foolish, easy to fool, easy to discard. I don't know if Lucas will ever understand what he threw away. I don't know if 20 years from now, sitting in a prison cell, he'll finally understand that the man he tried to erase was never as weak as he assumed. Built a quiet life once, out of nothing but hard work and patience. I can build one again. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Take care of yourselves and take care of the people who actually deserve your trust.